G'day and welcome everyone to Indie Over 50. Today I'm really excited to be able to interview Marc Schuster. And Marc is from America. He's going to tell you all about his background in a moment, but I'll just do the little quick takeaways for you. He's an artist, he's a musician, he's a writer, he's pursued ambient, he's pursued indie pop, and he's created communities. And now he's a program director of a radio station. So check it out. Welcome, Marc.
Good to be here.
Where do we find you today?
I am in just outside of Philadelphia in the United States of America.
But really appreciate you making the time for us to be able to have a chat today. Just in terms of introducing you to the Indie Over 50 audience, please let us know a little bit about who you are as an Indie Over 50 artist right now.
Okay. Mainly, I am a musician. I play in a band called Cobras, but I also perform some of my own music under my own name, Marc Schuster. I'm in a few other projects as well. But one of the really most fulfilling things I do as far as being engaged with the indie community is a combination of blogging and doing a weekly radio show where I play music by indie artists.
That is very, very cool. And we're gonna dig down into that, and I'm really excited to hear that you're presenting that indie music. Kind of like goes to my next question, which is, and I asked this because with Indie Over 50, most of us have our hearts set with bands that we grew up with. So I asked, who's your favorite 21st century artist?
I really like the Shins, actually. Their album, oh gosh, now I'm blanking on it. I had it all written down. I should have brought the notepad with me. But I think the Shins are great. I really enjoy their album that came out in 2001, and the song "New Slang" that's on that album is really great.
Now that we've talked about the 21st century, as an Indie Over 50 artist, if we roll back and think about how you got involved in music, I'm going to ask you this question. What was the first musical purchase you made?
I remember buying the sheet music for Safety Dance when I was 8 or 9, and it was because I feel like my parents had a stereo with a record player, but I really wasn't allowed to play with it. And so it was, all right, I probably won't buy the record. I'll just buy the sheet music and learn to play it on the piano.
That is so cool. What a great way of taking control as well, and playing it on the piano. And were you getting
And I
lessons at
loved
the
that
time?
song. Yeah, I was. I was getting lessons, and it was the kind of thing where I could hear, that opening. There's this little octave on the E's, it goes dun 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 dun, dun, and I could do that, and when you play it on the piano, and when you're a little kid and you just start to hear, yeah, actually that sounds a little bit, that kind of sounds like the way the song does. It's not a synthesizer, it's not, but it's close enough. So I'm making music.
Oh, that is very, very cool. That is a great story. So, and a really cool way of getting into starting your music passion as well, and putting your putting your money into investing in pursuing your art as well. So tell me about your, we're both over 50. So tell me about your musical journey. We've got back to when you're 8 or 9, but outside of that, tell us about your musical journey as an Indie Over 50 artist, Marc.
Yeah, I mean, just as far as being where I am now, I think music was always part of my life, but it wasn't the central part of my life. I have a job, I'm a teacher, and I've always been at least tangentially involved in various types of creative scenes. And probably about 10 or 15 years ago, I was really into the indie writing scene. And so I had written a couple of books and was really involved with some literary magazines and the local literary scene. But after a while, I got very burnt out on it. And I realized that I needed something more than just sitting in front of my computer and trying to struggle to come up with just words and invented scenarios, things of that nature. And I realized that whenever I wasn't writing, I was procrastinating by making music. And that made me realize I think the thing I really want to be doing is making music.
That's a
And the great thing
very
about it
productive
is
version of
it has allowed me
procrastination, I must
to
say. I was saying that's a very
it
productive
it
version
is.
of
A friend of mine was
procrastination.
telling me yeah, yeah. A friend of mine was telling me recently that the best way to be productive is to always have 5 or 6 projects going so that whenever you're procrastinating on one project, you're working on another one. And so that philosophy has served me fairly well. But yeah, and just the other great thing though is that I also wanted to be among other people because writing, for me at least, was such a solitary action. And playing music and reaching out to these other bands, it gave me a chance to go see bands play, go to bars and see bands playing, and to actually join a couple of other bands and get to know people. So that really helped me break out of my tendency to be fairly introverted and somewhat self-isolating.
There's an interesting through line, though, in that discussion is that it's that pendulum between writing and words and music, and that's really a foundation for you now because of the blog and your creative writing experience as well. But you also dropped in there around your career, and that's another question I was going to ask about. Not all of us in India over 50 have always been making money or living or earning to pay the bills through music. So I heard you were a teacher. So you want to tell us about your non-career music and life, non-music career and
Oh
life?
yeah, absolutely. Not non-music career in life. Yeah, I went to graduate school to study English. That um, I mean, that was quite a number of years ago at this point. I graduated from Temple University in 2005 with a PhD in English, and that same year I started teaching where I teach now at Montgomery County Community College in Bluebell, Pennsylvania, which is probably about, I don't know, 10 miles, 15 miles outside of Philadelphia. And I have been mainly I teach freshman composition, which is how to write a college level essay. And the rest of the time, occasionally I'll teach a creative writing class or an American literature class. But mostly my bread and butter is teaching that college essay.
Well, teaching essays must be really, really challenging. I recall it was something about intro, body, conclusion, and then I went to work and they said, no, make it conclusion, body, introduction, whatever. I think I think today though the challenge must be AI. That must be a constant challenge in your professional career now, with the ability for the students to
It
write
has. It
their
is
essays
completely,
through AI.
yeah, absolutely. It's completely turned everything upside down for me. It used to be I could easily spot if a student plagiarized because they took it from the internet somewhere. It was a Wikipedia page or something like that. And now a huge part of my job is trying to figure out um, if something is genuinely a student's work. And sometimes it's a question of, all right, well, I'm looking at these other things you wrote, and now I'm looking at this thing you wrote, and the voices are totally different. And other times it's just a question of just this sense of almost constant doubt or questioning on my end, which is very disconcerting for me because I'd like to be able to trust all of my students, but then you start just seeing a lot of this very mechanical looking writing and you're not really sure, okay, did a person write this? Did the student write this? Where did this writing come from? It's a whole new world of challenges for educators everywhere, I would imagine.
And it's a young problem at this stage. It's interesting. You mentioned plagiarism earlier, and there was probably a time where it could escape, but then I understand that there were very sophisticated tools provided to educators to spot the plagiarism that had trawled the internet and could identify those lifting. Do you think that those tools will be possible for determination of whether students have adopted
Yeah, there
AI?
are yeah, there are versions of those tools available now. They're not great because they're false positives and false negatives, the rates are still fairly high.
Hmm.
And so you can't, sometimes I'll run a paper through one of those detectors just to give me a sense of where I stand. And if it says, okay, it's 99% sure, then maybe I'll start digging a little bit. And a lot of what I describe as digging a little bit, a lot of the times it's just talking to the students. And sometimes students, whether they're being honest or not, say, "Oh, I didn't know. I wasn't supposed to present. I wasn't supposed to just ask ChatGPT to write the paper for me. I didn't realize. I'm sorry." And often when the students come to me and say and are honest about it, then we can have a discussion about, all right, well, why are you in college? You're here
Hmm.
to develop skills. You're not going to develop those skills if you're using, essentially cheating for the assignments. So that, at the very least, allows me to help the student get a better sense of why they probably shouldn't be cheating. Sometimes I'll also, if I sense a few students in the class have been cheating, I'll post something along the lines of, well, um, I'll send an email to students. I feel like I think a lot of students were using AI for the assignment. So if anyone has anything to tell me, come forward now. And inevitably, it's students who I didn't even suspect will come forward. Oh yeah, I did. I'm really sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. And I'll just again have that conversation with them that helps us get to, all right, well, you know what? Don't don't do that anymore. Let's do your own work. I care about what your thoughts are, what your ideas are, and I can't get a sense of what those things are if you're not presenting me your own work.
What I love about this interesting reflection on the impact of AI is that the most valuable part that it inspires is real connection, real communication, real conversations with your students. So that's incredibly powerful, and yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I'm sure we'll get to that maybe in music as well, but that's why it's such an interesting area. It's interesting to hear how you're facing that challenge at a professional level, and there's and the insights you take away from that professional domain, and where all of us in the professional and the amateur domain of music are challenged by AI as well at the moment. It's a big topic.
It's funny too. Sometimes I use a phrase that I first heard on your YouTube station. You have said in the past that what AI gives you is the average of averages, which I think is the perfect description of it because it statistically it draws on basically just the database of all the things that have ever been written and just says, all right, on average, this word should follow this word. And when I talk to my students about it, I'd say, well, look, you can be the average of averages, but that's not interesting. It's more interesting to be yourself and who you really are.
Mhm. Well, thanks for that feedback. It's the challenge for us right now is that it's a very good average because the average published successful record is really, really good, and that's so it's providing these counterintuitive outcomes. Actually, I was going to ask you this question about your back to your student essays. My question is, have you ever seen hallucinations from AI in their essays?
Well, I have seen hallucinations, and actually, one way to catch students at doing it is to develop discussion prompts that will yield hallucinations. Um, for example, you can put hidden text in the discussion prompt that will tell the AI to do something, but the student doesn't know that the AI is being told to do that thing. And then when that shows up in the paper, you can kind of talk to the student like, well, your assignment says this. This thing doesn't actually make any sense. And then the student doesn't really know how to respond because the student didn't write it. But the majority of the AI hallucinations occur when students have to cite sources because you'll see sources that are just don't exist. Either authors who don't exist um, or just entire sources that don't exist.
That's so interesting. Okay. And look, that might be a pathway. Again, AI, by definition, over time, will get better at it's a bit like the six finger illustrations, they'll probably get better at managing hands to avoid the six finger uh, visualizations of people that we've seen. Look, let me tell you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and if we're talking about your India Over 50 music adventure, so here you were on piano as a young person, but then you went down the college route and made it profession. So how did that music intersperse with your younger years? Bands, writing, how did that all work together?
Yeah, when I was very young, I played piano, and then I started taking guitar lessons when I was in high school, and I would play in a couple of bands with friends of mine, and then that continued through college. And it was always the kind of thing where it was difficult to find people who wanted to consistently work on music. And after a while, it's just like, okay, hey, do you want to start a band? Yeah, let's start a band. All right, then we'll meet up, and then people have things to do, especially going from, say, high school into college. People's lives are just in constant flux, and so it's all right. In high school, we got a band together. Oh wait, we're all going to colleges, all different places, all over the country. All right, that's not going to work. Then you're in college, you're playing with a few people, then we graduate and they all disperse out into the world. So after a while, and myself included, it was a question of, well, I need to start thinking about what I'm going to do for a living. I need to start thinking about how I'm going to pay the bills. And that's when I started getting more entrenched in the world of writing. I was a magazine editor for a couple of years before returning to graduate school. And then when I was in graduate school, there was very little time to really do much with music. But then I would say around 2004, I think, I got a MacBook with GarageBand on it. And that was huge because up until then, I had a Tascam 4-track cassette recorder that I would use to record. And I got fairly decent at it. But once you start playing with almost infinite tracks in GarageBand, anything becomes possible. And that's when I really started getting back into music production and just experimenting with music and having fun with it again. And that was also about when the distraction of music in my life really started to kick in whenever I was supposed to be writing.
I love GarageBand. Again, I've been a Mac addict, and I think it's probably one of the most powerful free tools that's not a core capability. That's I think their GarageBand is way better than any free tools they've done around video or imaging or painting or anything like that. GarageBand, in my simple view, is incredibly powerful. And yes, there's always a pathway to go to
Absolutely.
Logic or whatever it is, and you can dive deeper and get far more sophisticated. But out of the box for free, GarageBand is incredibly intuitive. And for you coming from a 4-track analog recorder, the access to all those virtual instruments and soundscaping would have been a treasure trove.
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, it was easy just to lose track of 4 hours at a sitting. You would just be, oh, let me fool with this. All right, I'll bring this drum loop in here. Now I'll have some synths and a bass. I could bring in a string section. This is amazing. And then 4 hours later, you're looking, look, I have 30 seconds of music. This is great.
Do you still use GarageBand, or do you Logic or Final Cut or Pro Tools?
Now I actually use Reason. I use Reason because I took a course. So at the college where I teach, there is a audio technology major, and they offer. I can take courses for free as a faculty member. And so I've taken a number of courses in their sound recording technology program. And that program introduced me to a number of different DAWs. And the one that I thought that worked best for me was Reason.
Okay, terrific. Okay, I've not heard of it, so it's always interesting to hear other alternatives, and it's obviously works well for you. So tell me about the as I say, across this journey as an indie over 50 artist now, there's multiple strings to this. Tell us about your band, and then we'll talk about your own music. We'll talk about the blog and creative outlets that you've got, and then we'll talk about your radio station.
Sure, absolutely. The band that I'm playing in now is called Cobras, and it grew out of a previous band I was in that was called Scoopski. And what happened was, through the blog where I interview various artists, I found out about this guy. His name's Jim Larino, and he and his wife were recording music together under the band name Scoopski. And as I was interviewing him, I really enjoyed his music. And I said, listen, if you guys ever want to expand and you want to start doing live shows, let me know. I'd love to be in your band. I'd love to play bass in your band. And about a year later, he got in touch and just said, hey, that's what we want to do. We want to start playing live. And I joined the band. Another musician from our area joined the band. And then we went through a couple of drummers, and we found a drummer who just happened to live 2 blocks from my house, basically. I'd never met him before, just coincidentally. He lived really close by. Perfect. And we played out for about a year, just local clubs. But after a while, I think keeping a 5-piece band together and working with everybody's schedules got to be a little bit difficult. And Jim's wife didn't love playing in some of the places we played. They were, and rightfully so. So they were just kind of dives and not very nice. And so she just said, she wanted to step back, and our guitar player wanted to focus on his own solo material. So that left the 3 of us. It was Jim, who sings and plays guitar, me on bass, and Nick Cervini, who is our drummer. And we just decided 3 of us are going to break off and form a 3-piece, but we want to write all new material. And we decided to call ourselves Del Cobras because Nick and I live in Delaware County, which is the county just outside of Philadelphia. And everyone calls it Delco. And,
Okay.
I wanted to work Delco into our name. And Jim said, well, what about Del Cobras? That sounds fun. That sounds like a kind of fun / punk kind of name for a band. So that's what we went with.
Great name. Yeah. And the style of music follows that then? It's kind of like edgy.
It's kind
indie.
of pop. Yeah, pop punk, or maybe power pop, something along those lines. A couple of people have also said it sounds a little new wave, because I tend to play bass like a song from the 80s. Mainly I just do eighth notes and root notes, with a couple of runs up and down, but mainly it's the dun, 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 and so that gives us that new wave kind of feel.
Oh, very cool. Okay. And then, so with the band, have you recorded or released it all?
Yes, we have 2 songs out. We have a song called The Turnaround and a song called Untied, and then in parentheses, She's the One. And we're working on a couple of other songs as well. We just got together as that band in late last year, I would say November or December. And so haven't had a whole lot of opportunities to record, but we have started playing out. We did a show at the end of May 31st. I got in touch with, this is back when we were with the other band. I got in touch with somebody who runs a small theater a couple of towns away. And I just asked, is the theater ever available for anything other than community plays and whatnot? And the woman I knew there said, oh yeah, you know what? Here's a date that's open. We can slot you guys in. You'll have to bring all the sound equipment. You'll have to take care of everything, but you can have the building. You can have the stage. And didn't charge us anything. They took a split of the door, and we were able to have our first show was a theater show, which was for us amazing, because it was a compared to what we're used to, I would describe it as a massive stage, as opposed to the little square they usually give you in the corner of a bar. Yes. Yeah. So that was a good show. And I had the good fortune also to be able to invite several other local acts to support us. And there's a band called Rescue Pets that I enjoy a lot. A band, actually, a couple of solo artists, Jesse Gimbel and Fatide Korngor, are two guys who make really interesting music. And Jesse actually produced our second single at his home studio. So it's a really supportive community that we have here, where a lot of artists really just try to help each other out to any extent they can.
I love it. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that in the description on this video we'll include a link to the Del Cobra, so so any links and available for Spotify or wherever you're available for people to be able to listen into. And with that, Marc, tell us about your
Oh,
own
great.
journey as a musician, as Marc
Yeah,
Schuster.
I mean, yeah, I went through a couple of phases as I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. Experimenting with GarageBand led me to start doing a lot of ambient music and instrumental music. And I was recording for a while under the name Android Invasion, which is the title of a Doctor Who serial from the 70s. And I thought that was, I was like, oh, yeah, I like it because it has that kind of mechanical, android, robotic feel to it. But then I started to expand, and I started to do music that was more rock and roll, had vocals, but I was still a little bit leery of performing under my own name. So I just took the Spanish translation of Schuster, which is Zapatero, and I was performing under that name. Then I would start little bands, and so I performed under the band name Plush Gordon, but that was basically me and whoever I was playing with. After a while, it just starts to get like you're just juggling too many things when it's like, oh no, this is my stage name and this is the band I'm in. And I just said, okay, that's too much. I'm going to simplify. It's just going to be Marc Schuster from now on. So it's just me. Everything I do is under my own name now, just so that I don't have to constantly think of, wait, what was the Twitter handle I was using to talk about this with this guy? And now it's all Marc Schuster. All my music comes out under my own name. And I've just been over the years, especially since COVID, just really focusing on trying to write and record music that I think is interesting, and to always try to do something new, to try to do something different, which I think is one of the huge benefits of being indie over 50. It's that it's if I were 22 or something, 24, trying to make a go of a music career, I feel like I would probably have to lock into a really specific style. And I would just have to say, okay, this is who I am. Whereas now I could say, okay, all right, you know what? The past couple of months, I've been reading a bunch of books about electronic musicians, and that's really inspired me. I could kind of sound like New Order or Depeche Mode. Oh, wait, I've just been listening to Elvis Costello records for the past 6 months, and I'm going to sound like him now. I'm going to do more of
Yeah.
a rock and roll singer-songwriter kind of a vibe. So to me, it keeps it interesting, keeps it new, and just always just keeps it fresh and fun, which I think is really, really central to any creative endeavor.
Yeah, and I think you've really captured on one of the really amazing superpowers of being indie over 50, as you say, the ability to pursue so many different facets of your art. And again, we're talking about yourself as in a band, talking about as a solo artist, and then the fact that within your music you've pursued those alternate genres as well, and different approaches. Now we'll move to your writing, because writing has been central to your professional career, also your creative interests. And tell us about your blog and about your creative writing efforts as well, Marc.
Sure. The blog is called Abominations, but you could find it at marcschuster.com. And it's a place for me to meet new indie artists. I have been blogging for probably about, I've been blogging probably since 2005, but I, I've been running this blog and interviewing indie artists, indie musicians, at least 3 or 4 years, probably a little bit longer. And I've and all of the artists that I've interviewed are indexed on the blog. So if there's anyone you're ever curious about, you could just kind of go through and
Mhm.
say, "Oh yeah, this guy's in here. Oh, we interviewed that guy." But I've learned so much, and I've met so many interesting people by doing this that I just really started to feel like, wow, there is this large indie community out there. People who don't get played on the radio, people who you won't have heard about necessarily, but who occupy an important part either in their local music scene or just in kind of the music of a particular genre. And it's people like us who are just really interested in doing something fun and new and interesting with music. And I just always learned something new from everybody I've talked to on that blog. And it's just been wonderful to kind of be at the center of a conversation sometimes, and just to be able to talk to people about why they do what they do and how they do it, and what their plans are, what they're trying to do with their music. It's just so much fun, and like I said, I've met so many people doing it.
In fact, I can thank you very, very much. We met through the process of Indie Over 50 and your invitation for me to appear on your blog. And what I really appreciated about that interaction was how thoughtful your questions were, and how much it really exercised my mind in talking about in responding to those. So I've always really appreciated that, and we'll have the links below. And yes, you can find details of that interview as well. Uh,
Yeah, and
let's
I love that. I love that people frequently tell me that they appreciate the thoughtfulness of my questions, because I know that I've done some um, blog interviews where clearly it's a list of 10 questions they ask everybody.
yes.
And that's fine, but at the same time, I when I'm listening to a band and I'm hearing their music, a lot of times something will just occur to me. It's like, wow, how did they do that? Or wow, this is a really interesting turn of phrase. What inspired that? Or when I'm reading through their press materials, they'll say, they'll explain, all right, well, we think of ourselves as such and such. And it'll be, I don't know, it could be a weird metaphor they use. We're like a two-legged stool or something like that. And I was like, what do you mean by that? You're a two-legged stool. And they'll say, oh, we just thought we had to say something interesting. And then, but as I think about it, let me explain. Here's what it means. But it it means something to me to help artists say things that they want to say, basically, about their work. I just feel like there are so many people who who are working at some kind of art who just want to be understood. I mean, that's why we're artists. So and to me, that's why those questions are so important. And it's also why, to me, that I always think, well, what are the questions I would want to be asked about my music? Okay, I'll ask that question about this music. So
Yes.
it's it's just inspiring, as far as I'm concerned, to just to be in contact with all of these creative people.
Yeah, it's an amazing community that you're tapping into, and the stories and creativity. It's really, really inspiring. And but as I say, there's you've got so many dimensions to how you're pursuing your portfolio of creative pursuits, Mark, and brings us to one that's a more recent one that I've seen is your engagement on public radio, digital radio now. So do you want to tell us about that adventure as well?
Absolutely. I have been involved with this radio station. It's called AMS Radio, um, for quite a while. And again, I think this may have come through the blog. It may have been through social media. The fellow who runs it put up a post one day years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, on Twitter. And I think he may have been joking, but he said, "Does anybody want a radio show?" And I said, "I want a radio show." And I got in touch with him and said, "Hey, I saw your post on Twitter. You said, does anybody want a radio show? I have a little bit of experience with radio. Did some radio in college. I did this interview show at the school where I work, and I just think it would be really cool to have a show where I highlight indie music and draw on a lot of the people I've met through my blog. And he said, "Yeah, sure, put one together. Let me hear what it sounds like." So I recorded about an hour of music of me introducing songs, saying who the artists were, saying why I like them. Sent it to him. He said, "All right, it's going to be up on Wednesday night." It's like, wow, I just thought that was a demo.
Live.
And so he ran it that Wednesday, and then as soon as that started, every Wednesday for about 2 or 3 years, I have just cranked out another episode, and then sometimes it used to be called the Tweetcore Radio Hour, but then we changed it to Abominations to kind of, well, because Twitter wasn't Twitter anymore, and just to bring it in line with the Abominations blog. And so,
Yeah.
I've done some episodes that were entirely interview based, and then I've also mostly I do episodes that are a bit of me talking for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we get into the music. And since then, the fellow who runs the station, he's been very busy because, like all of us, or most of us anyway, who are engaged in the music community, he has a job as well, and his job's been keeping him pretty busy. So he asked me if I could take over as program director for the show. So now it's almost like I have, you know, 24 24 hours a day of just like music that I think would sound pretty cool on an independent radio station. And as a result, I'm also just always on the lookout for new music. And I'm just always telling people, send me your music. I love being the guy who turns people on to some new sound. Like if you hear a song that you wouldn't have otherwise heard and you say, "Oh my gosh, that was a cool song." And I'm the guy who gave you that song. I just feel like, man, I did my job. That's just a wonderful feeling for me to be the connector.
I think there's two wonderful things about what you've just said there. Firstly, there's an open invitation, and we'll put the links and the opportunity below. Just like on Indie Over 50, we welcome and we receive links to Spotify and YouTube, and for the opportunity for people to submit music compositions for your consideration on your radio programming. But I think there's a second thing to this. So that's an opportunity. The second thing is the other opportunity to discover. And I love the fact that there are radio shows dedicated to discovering new talent rather than being captive to the Spotify algorithm and you'll be tossed up what they know works and they do it very, very well.
Yeah.
But the opportunity for us to
Mhm.
all to learn and discover. So I would look at it in this opportunity for both ways for all of anyone who's listening out there and who's creating music. Number one, an opportunity to you to be heard, and number two, an opportunity to be inspired and discover. So I think that's a really great opportunity that you're creating, Marc, with your work out there.
Oh, thank you.
So let me talk about the. I'm going to ask you this question. This is a bit of a standard question, but what's your greatest achievement as an indie over 50 artist?
I really think it's the sense of community I get. It's just I think at the height of my blog slash radio show, probably a couple years ago, when I was still much more engaged in social media, um, we had this moment that just we called it the tweetcore movement, and just kind of like hardcore, but we all met on Twitter, and it wasn't not hardcore metal, but just like hardcore, really into just being independent musicians. And I just felt, for a while there, it just felt like there were just all of these people who kind of revolved around my show and my blog. And the fact that that still goes on to an extent, that means a lot to me. That I can be somebody who does what you were just describing, provides that outlet for musicians, but also can be the guy who can help spread the word and help people find new music. That to me is, there's something to be said for, oh wow, I got this many plays on Spotify or something like that. That's great. But to me, that's a number, and you could say, I have a goal of getting this many plays. Then you get that many plays, and you're still the same guy you were before you had it. But I feel like when you are interacting with other people and being part of a community, when that happens, that's transformative. You kind of become a a better version, or at least a different version of yourself for having been exposed to all of these different people and their ideas and their music.
I love that takeaway, and I love that insight. And that I'm drawn to the numbers. I remember your tagline to our article about when we spoke through the blog. But you're right, there's so much more meaning, and connection is really, really powerful that you're creating here. So I think that's a great way. In terms of advice, tips for indie over 50 artists, have you got anything that you'd like to recommend or suggest there, Mark?
Yeah, to me, it's all about making connections. And I feel like, we always hear that people need to network. And I feel like networking gets this somewhat negative connotation because it sounds like, oh, I got to have a business card and meet people. Hi, let me tell you about my music. Um, but I think that the impulse is frequently to say, if you're thinking, oh, I want people to listen to my music, is to say, I have music. You got to hear my music. Here's the CD, or, here's a link. Here's a QR code. I think the real way to do it is to listen. I mean, listen to other people's music, find music that resonates with you, and kind of try to become part of that community. One of the one of the professors, a music professor at the college where I teach, he said, people always ask me, how do you break into the music industry? And I mean, you wouldn't ask, how do you break into someone's house? It's it's more about making friends. It's more about
Mm.
making connections and meeting new people. And so don't think of it as breaking into the music industry. Think of it as just becoming, like, meeting the music industry, getting to understand the music industry, or just getting to understand, if you're fortunate enough, your local scene, or getting to know other people who make music that's similar to yours online. And a lot of times it does. It takes a bit of work. It takes coming out of your shell. It takes, if you're like me, an introvert, it takes a conscious decision to reach out to people, and it can kind of sometimes feel awkward. It can sometimes kind of feel like you're risking rejection. I one of the more interesting people I've worked with is this fellow named Brian Lambert. He lives in Texas, and that's like a couple thousand miles away from me. But I heard some of his music. I interviewed him on my blog, and I had this piece of music that I had written, but I didn't have any words for it, didn't have a melody. I just had the kind of the backing track. And I just thought, there was a moment where I thought to myself, hey, this guy Brian sounds interesting. I think given what we've talked about before, I think he'd like this track. And there was a part of me that was thinking, I don't want to bother that guy. He has stuff that he's busy. But then there was a part of me that was like, nah, like, what do I have to lose? I'll just email him, see if he's interested. If he's not, no worries. But if he is, who knows where it could go. And together, I mean, the two of us recorded 2 albums together under the name The Star Crumbles. So that
Wow.
was, me taking a little risk led to this very interesting collaboration.
I love that story. And I think in terms of your advice and recommendations for Indie Over 50, I think you've just put it so beautifully. It's about connecting with people, connecting with community, uh, rather than the outcome driven, I want to get this many likes and streams and all those things which will measure or will be identified. But I love about engaging on the community. And it's probably echoes certainly what I've found. And I also love your story about collaboration. It's actually a topic that I'm interested in pursuing on the India Over 50 channel. I've had a couple of people now reach out and suggest I feature on it. And in my own world, I've developed recently a relationship with a young Swedish singer, and he's an amazing big band jazz style singer. And he for some reason I was following him on Instagram, and he was singing a song, a verse, and said, "Can anyone help me finish writing this song?" And so we've finished that together, and we've worked on a couple of others now, and some will be released at some point. So it's such an exciting
That's great.
process, and impossible to have conceived of without the technology and social media. So for all its ills, the connection and community can be compelling and powerful.
Absolutely.
But with that, one of the things I'd like to just wrap up with is you've talked about your favorite artists of the 21st century. Very cool. It's the Shins, right? So, in terms of any other indie over 50 artists that you recommend that we check out or follow, and whoever you mention, I'll make sure we put the links below as well.
Certainly. There are two guys who really inspire me a lot. One, his name's Chris Triggs. He lives in Wales and he performs under the name the La La Lets. And what I find so inspiring about him is that he's both very productive and he just writes from the heart. When I listen to what he is singing about, often it's about people he knows, experiences he's had, and it's when I interviewed him quite a number of years ago, I described it to him as anti-pop in the sense
Right.
of he's not trying to please a mass audience. He's trying to just kind of chronicle his life and explore kind of the inner workings of being a human being. And just I just find his music to be very touching. And another fella I have absolute respect for is Dino DeMuro. He lives in California. And his music reminds me a lot of Frank Zappa. It's kind of complex, does a lot of interesting things, often surprising, very humorous. But he's another guy who is extremely prolific and extremely inventive. And it's just that inventiveness of his music that always inspires me. So those are just two guys. The La La Lets is the one band, and Dino DeMuro. It to me, it's just they capture what it means to be an indie artist.
They are two great recommendations. So I'll be interested in checking them out as well. And as I say, we'll have the links below. So, look, Mark, with that, I just want to offer my personal thanks. Thank you for being so generous with your time and sharing some insights as an indie over 50 artist. I really appreciate what we've seen, the interesting portfolio of creative, pursuits that you've been able to manage across your career, interspersed with your professional life, but really that creative core, through your pursuit of music, bands, collaborations, your writing and blogs, and now here you are, program director of radio, and creating and supporting communities. So with that, I want to say thank you for being our guest on Indie Over 50 today.
Thank you, John. The pleasure was all mine.